Hi there, I'm Linda Banfalvi. Welcome to my studio. Here I am painting a small 12 by 12 panel, and I'm painting my painting called Rocks and Rapids, and I'm using oil and cold wax medium. I think that the speed of this is sped up a little bit so that it's not like watching cement set. But I'll talk you through the process so you know what I was doing and thinking at the time. And I put my first layer down of a transparent warm color to create the warm glow that I like to have coming from within my landscape paintings. And now I am using a transparent orange to sketch out my design. You'll see me glancing down quite frequently, especially sped up a little bit. I'm using a photograph that is my reference for how I want to make the design. And it's on I have a little iPad type thing that's showing my image in a reasonable like 8 by 10 type of size, but I keep glancing down at that as I'm doing my initial sketch. And it's very loose, and I'm just making marks, the illusion of where the background trees are and the water coming around the rocks and the rocks in the foreground. And I'm just looking at my photo to look where the darks are and the lights, and playing back and forth with that idea like I would as if I was doing any kind of a sketch. I'm just sketching it directly on my panel with my paints. I'm using this Messermeister bowl scraper. It's a silicone scraper that's supposed to be designed for using in a kitchen, but it's quite lovely to use instead of a palette knife. I like to use it because it has a nice smooth feeling as you're applying the paint. And when I use a palette knife, it's just a little bit scrapey and it's hard. Like the metal, it makes a weird noise. I'm not as fond. I will use the palette knife, but I really love this because it's a softer feel for applying the paint. And I can apply the paint, scrape the paint off, move it, make marks. As you can see, I'm using all parts of that silicone scraper. I use the big edge, I use the point, I use the sides. Like you'll see me moving it around in different directions to apply the paint, how I want. I find it quite a useful tool. Most of this whole little painting will be done with this one tool. I do use other tools as well, but this demonstration is going to be fairly quick. I was painting it, instead of doing a thumbnail sketch, which a lot of artists do, with a little square with their pencils or markers to design their painting. I was planning on doing this 4-foot tall by 3-foot wide painting, even though this is a different dimension. This is a square little panel. It wasn't really a thumbnail, but it was just, I wanted to feel the whole idea out on a small panel before I painted on my big 4-foot panel. And it was a quick exercise for me to do and figure out whether I wanted to use this color combination and that sort of thing. So I did do this little one first, and I liked it quite well when I was done, and it said the things, and there was lots of movement in it, and so I used it as I was painting my large painting. I found it was really useful to have done the small one first. I have to say though, often I just like to dive into a big painting and just work it out as I go, because to me that's part of the fun, is the not knowing. But every now and then I will try something on for size in a small painting and then make some bigger paintings. if I like what was going on. So it's a great way to start a series of paintings too, by painting a lot of small ones and then decide which ones speak to you to work up in a bigger format. So you saw me putting in the darks, and I put in some greens. Everything has been transparent up until now. And so now I am adding in an opaque, which is the light blue color that I'm putting into where the sky area is and shining, it's poking little sky holes between the trees. And I'm going to bring that down into the water as well. So I'm starting with the first opaque color over several, 1, 2, 3, 4 transparent colors. And most of the colors are quite warm. So this opaque is quite cool. And what I like about this is I'm very loose with how my approach to putting the paint on this panel, and I'm letting this opaque mix with the transparencies underneath, and the colors of the green and some of the oranges and things, they take on their own life. It's like mixing the paint on the panel, and I really enjoy working that way. And I'm working the whole panel. I'm not like doing one area, I'm not finishing one area and then moving on to the next. If you'll notice, I'm working the whole painting with each color of paint and balancing that. So now I'm taking it down into the water, that blue color, the water that's coming down around the rocks, it will be reflecting sky color. Oh, there I have a palette knife out. I used it to scrape some of the paint off the thing and off of the Messermeister scraper. Sometimes I have 2 tools in my hands at once. I might have a palette knife or and the scraper, or sometimes it's that scraper and a rag, because I'll use a rag to soften edges or blend some paint. Whatever works. Sometimes I just use my gloved finger to do that. So here I put in the blue, reflecting the sky color into the water, and I'm now adding a warm type of white opaque. I'm alternating between the warm and the cool over top of that yellow underpainting. And I'm trying to create the illusion of the movement of water coming from the top left part of the painting. The water's pouring down over a small little set of rapids and then coming down and around the big boulders and rocks that are in the foreground. And there's like a nice, if you look at it in terms of design, it's like a big lazy S going through the composition, leading your eye through where the water's moving. This is an area that's about 10-minute drive from where I live, and I go for walks in there and take a million photographs. Many times I've actually plein air painted in this area of Ontario that's just beautiful. There's rapids and little side streams like this one, and paths that you can walk on, and you can hear the water just flowing, especially in the spring. It's really loud. It's just a gorgeous place, and I really enjoy the variation in the way the trees and the rocks and the water all interplay with each other. There's so many paintings. Every time I go, I see about 1 million paintings. Maybe not 1 million, but at least 100. I might be prone to exaggeration sometimes. So I'm restating the darks again. I go back and forth, and now I've been making marks up into the background tree areas and redefining some of the tree trunks. Where I put the blue sky, I'm just carving in some more tree trunks over top of that because some of the previous marks might have been removed. So I don't worry about that as I put things in, and then as I proceed, some of that might get covered up, some of it might not, and I just play back and forth with what's important to what I want to show, and just keep working it down back and forth from light to dark. And I know I'm done when things feel balanced and I've said what I want to say. Darkening that corner a little bit and bringing some of those tree shapes down to bring them a little bit more forward in the picture plane. And I'm paying attention to that top edge right now, carving into over top of the light value pattern I had to show the tree trunks. I want my shapes to connect off the edges. This tool is a magical tool for, like I said, for applying paint and for carving into the beautiful buttery oil and cold wax medium. I'm liking how things are setting up in the background there and creating a little sense of distance. And now I'm adding some neutral colors, mixed up some with the colors that I'm using. I've mixed up a cool gray. Everything's very warm in this painting, so there's some nice neutrals that I'm setting into the rock areas. And those colors look really lovely with all that orange that's peeking through. Those neutral cool grays. And as I'm tinkering around, sometimes I don't have paint on my scraper. I'm just moving paint around. I'm softening an edge or blurring, making some other little textures that indicate maybe some grasses or twigs, that sort of thing. It's very minimal marks that create the illusion of the elements in a landscape. And here I'm adding in some lighter value grays into the foreground rocks where the light's hitting part of it to try to model the form. And I'm never really worried about being perfect all the way through because I know I could change things as I go. So it's a free way to paint. I'm just making marks and twigs and grasses and creating that illusion. And I try not to overwork one area. I apply some paint, then I move on to another part. I try not to dwell in one area. I'm trying to work the whole painting. And towards later in the painting, I start to slow down a bit to look and see where's the light, where should the light hit, and what edges need to be restated or that kind of thing. I start to slow down and take my time with considering those elements in the design. It's all very quick and spontaneous as I first start, and then even though this is still at the same slightly faster speed, I'm spending more time looking and deciding. Restating a dark there because I didn't like the way I had done that. And the more layers you put on this, the more texture you get. It's just so much fun to work with. And every little mark into the tender paint, like sometimes it starts to set up and you can layer over top without disturbing the underlayer, but sometimes you can carve in and make these little marks, and it sets yourself up for the next layer that you're going to do. And sometimes, depending on what environment, like if I'm in the studio, things might set up within an hour or even half an hour of putting down that layer, and you can already move into the next layer. And if you've created some neat marks, those marks will affect the next layer that you do. I'm creating some marks here now that kind of make me feel like there's twigs into the foreground coming out of the rock crannies. And with the marks that are made in those background trees, I can't just have those marks in one part of the painting. I'm trying to balance the mark making through my composition. So I'm having some of those kind of marks that are coming from the foreground overlapping some of the shapes, like overlapping the shapes of the water a bit, that kind of thing. Just having some fun with some of the elements that were actually in the photograph. I'm eliminating other elements that are there that don't help me with my composition. So you're the artist, you get to do the editing and adding things that may not have been there, or just changing exactly their importance. That sort of thing. And all of this touching that I'm just going with that scraper, doing little touches and marks, and that all sets up if I want to go over top of that. And I can if it's an area that's too dark, I can go and scrape some of the dark out by making those marks. And it looks like light's coming through those trees. I had quite a dark area there, so I wanted to connect some of that mark making, as it's a design element that I'm trying to make work through the whole painting. So I'm watching myself put a few marks and then standing back and looking, and okay, now I'm modifying that rock shape again and some of the water coming around. I wanted the feeling that water was coming around that boulder and just flowing down towards you, which it actually was when I took the photo of this image that inspires the painting. I just showed an area where I circled. That's my focal point, is to the right of that boulder where the water is coming down, and I want to make good, thick, juicy layers of, I put some light paint there, and trying to, with my marks and the way I'm putting that light value paint on, I want to create the movement. That water is coming forward and down. Cleaning up a couple distracting little marks that are in the back there. Quick, light strokes. Say it like you mean it. Because if it doesn't come exactly off the palette knife or scraper how you want it, you can always go in and restate it again. Make marks that feel confident and not timid. You don't want to be timid when you're painting, because then the painting will look like you're trying to be careful the whole way, and when that happens, then you get a very tight painting. So I'm just trying to be confident and put my marks on, and then sometimes I'll scrape things off, but we'll see. Just work it through that way. So I'll put it on with one side of that scraper, and then sometimes I'll turn the scraper to use the bottom corner to scrape off. Like there. I'll use it to scrape or to blend. Changed my mind, didn't want that branch. See how easy that was to change the mind. Put something in and then, no, we'll just remove it. So here I am scraping off the rock because I wasn't particularly happy for some reason when I came back to that, and I'm looking at it going, yeah, this was the next day. I think I took a break, and then now I'm coming back and I went, yeah, I don't like that rock. So I'm scraping off some of the really thick chunks of paint, and I'm using a pottery tool that is really fun to use for removing paint, and then I get this really neat texture. I like the way that orange is coming through, even though I'm going to paint over top of some of that. But I'm just removing it so that I have the certain texture that I wanted before I continued. So I'm restating the neutral gray. Got my little rag. So everything on the painting is touch dry now. It was still workable enough that I could scrape out some of that paint off that rock. And now I'm able to apply some paint, and then I could soften it with my rag or create glazes and things like that over the next layer, which is what I tend to like to do. Anyways, that rock was bothering me, so I decided to try again. So I'm looking at my lights and darks. And the funny part, even though I scraped some of it off, there's still stuff on there that I created the previous day. And so it's going to affect the next layer. So if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't get the exact type of textures that I'm getting. So I'm just trying to say that it's a no fear painting, because if you don't like it, you can just paint over it. I think I was just trying to get some different angles, or maybe a little bit stronger angles in that rock. Have the light hitting part of it there along that top surface. And I know when I painted my big 4-foot painting that I've just completed, that rock, I didn't scrape anything off, but I learned from this painting how I wanted to create that other rock, like on my big painting. So it was useful. And I did even more layers than this on my big painting to get the effect that I wanted. And because the underlayer is pretty dry, it's, like I said, touch dry, I'm able to delicately apply these highlights and still get that, the way the rock looks rough, the lights and the midtones that are in there and the darks. And you're able to modify those shapes with different values. And I just love the texture that gets brought out from that. I'm just adding a little bit more neutral there just to bring that part of the rock face forward because it's a little bit lighter in value. And then the dark sections that I've left, it sends it on a slightly different plane because the light's hitting it a little bit differently. So I just found that a little more interesting to look at than the way I had done the rock previously. And a couple of the dark areas that are really dark, I'm just adding that middle value neutral just to have a variety in that shape so that it's not all solid dark. It's got some areas where the light's hitting it and just makes it more interesting to look at. And I modified that edge a little bit with some light. And we're cutting close to the end of this painting. It's almost done. I'm adding a little glaze of transparent blue. So I've got my blue. I don't remember if this was actually ultramarine blue or phthalo. It could have been a little of both. But I add a little extra wax in there just to make it a little more translucent. And I'm layering it over top of that light value blue into a darker value of blue because I wanted to make the water a little more three-dimensional. It creates like a shadowed area. That blue is vibrant and transparent glaze. And I love how that looks with the orange that's in the underpainting. Orange and blue are complementary colors, and it creates a little vibration there. And by having it a dark, transparent blue, it just creates depth in that area of the painting. And I want your eye to go to that area, the bottom right quadrant, where the water's flowing by that big boulder. So that little zing of blue that I put in there brings your eye there and vibrates with the orange. I'm balancing that same color throughout along the far shore of the stream and just balancing it so that it's not just in that one spot, connecting out to that right-hand edge right there. It makes it look a little more, even though it's impressionistic, it adds that depth when you're using a transparent glaze like this. I consider this glazing because you can still see the colors underneath. And I'm just connecting the edges in there, and it's just it creates a really nice glow to the painting and cools it down just a little bit because it's got lots of warmth to the trees and the foliage. This is probably like a fall day where the trees some of the leaves are down, and so I'm just adding a little coolness. And there's little cracks and crevices into the water areas, so when I add that, it just accentuates some of those areas. So there you have it. Thank you for joining me in my studio. I hope you enjoyed this little painting. Join me again.